My most expensive and most spectacular purchase during this 14-month trip through Latin America was scuba diving in the Galapagos. I almost decided not to go because of the high cost. The national park fee alone is $100. My biggest splurge has always been scuba diving. I got advanced open water certified in the Philippines. I considered doing an 8-day liveaboard dive cruise, but instead decided to do a land tour. It was cheaper and involved a lot of travel time, but I was concerned about seasickness, since I'd be diving during high season when the currents were strong. I used an agent referred to me by a fellow traveler I met in Colombia. He declared the Galapagos Islands were the safest place in all of Latin America. On my flight from Quito, I chatted with an older American woman from Detroit. I asked which island she was headed to first. She said she didn't know. She'd check later, then threw her head back and laughed, saying how she was the most scatterbrained traveler there ever was. Yet, she always ended up exactly where she needed to be. It turned out we were going to the same island. The Galapagos has a unique location. Several major ocean currents run through the volcanic islands. This plays a huge role in shaping the marine ecosystems, but it also means strong, choppy waters. A word of advice on Galapagos cruises. It's much cheaper to show up at an agency and ask what's available last minute. Booking months ahead is thousands of dollars more expensive. Tour companies rely on clients who book ahead to cover all the fuel costs and expenses. Any vacancies left can be sold at a fraction of the price. A $7,000 luxury cruise can be sold for $3,500 or less. I know booking last minute isn't an option for most people, but just a heads up on how things work. I knew I made the right decision on the first dive trip. The waves weren't high, but the rocking back and forth still made me seasick. If I had chosen a cruise, I would have been at the mercy of the ocean for a week straight, instead of a few hours each day. I fought against the rising tide of nausea, but consoled myself knowing the seasickness would stop once I got into the water. My wetsuit was so tight, I needed help from the crew to zip me in. We saw a turtle within a few minutes of descending, then black-tip sharks, then more turtles. My first encounter with sharks was in Borneo a few years ago. I was nervous during the briefing, apprehensive of their infamous reputation, but my fear vanished as soon as I saw one glide by, completely uninterested in me. Different species have their dispositions. The smaller reef sharks can actually be rather shy. Tiger sharks, bull sharks, and great whites are the more aggressive species. After 2 dives, we had lunch on the boat. Rice, fish, salad, and hot tea. I sat in the sun to get warm. Among the people in my dive group was a new mother from Germany traveling with her husband and infant son. They were taking turns looking after the baby on this trip. Today was her day to go diving. She gave me some seasickness chewing gum, which worked surprisingly well. An older French man in our group looked at me with a sympathetic nod and said, "Sometimes you feel good, so you can relax and enjoy. Sometimes you feel bad, but it passes, and you will be fine again. This is life." The boat stopped at Cormorant Point, where we could go to explore. I chatted with Isabella, a university professor from Sao Paulo. She was treating herself to a vacation in the Galapagos after a work conference on the mainland. We walked along the green beach, careful not to disturb the sea lions. The water looks green because of the olivine crystals in the sand. I told her I was traveling the world while working as a freelance writer from my laptop. She said she would have done the same when she was younger, but got offered a tenure track position after finishing her PhD. And she was already married. Over a decade later, she was a tenured professor of epistemology and divorced. Her backpack was almost as tall as she was, but she carried it like it was weightless. Inside, she had rock climbing gear, scuba diving gear, and business clothes, complete with high heels and suits. She even invited me to stay at her apartment in Sao Paulo once I made my way to Brazil. I had the sense we both envied each other a little bit. She of my complete freedom of location, unencumbered by my work, and I of her career, shaping her travels with a sense of purpose. On the boat ride back, we saw a manta ray leap into the air and do a somersault. I asked the naturalist why they did this. She replied, manta rays breach when mating or feeding. It seems to be the two main reasons why we do anything. We saw more turtles surfacing, and some were mating. It's unbelievable that sea turtles have been around since dinosaurs walked the earth, and yet outlived them all. I met Dominic on a marine iguana snorkeling tour. He'd been traveling for 8 months and was feeling ready to return to his life in London. He was 30 years old and looking for the woman to spend the rest of his life with. He met a girl on this trip who, coincidentally, lived around the corner from his apartment in London. I thought how romantic it would be if this turned out to be the girl for him, but unfortunately, he didn't think she was a compatible life partner and decided to remain friends. A glowing smile spread across his entire face as he talked about becoming a father someday, hopefully sooner rather than later. I met Jack on a volcano hike in Isabella Island. He had been traveling for 5 years after quitting his job in Germany. His eyes lit up with interest when I told him I was also a long-term traveler. He asked if I ever got lonely. I replied yes, of course. It isn't the ideal circumstance for lasting friendships, but no one forced us to live this way. We can stop anytime we wish, but we choose to keep going because we want to travel the world. The trade-off is clear. We can either accept the lonely periods and carry on, or stop traveling. Personally, I've experienced these lonely periods while having a permanent address, a stable job in an office, and a network of friends just a few neighborhoods away. Perhaps this is just the way I am, or the way we all are? Jack and I shared our travel plans and discovered we may overlap in Argentina. Maybe we'll see each other again in Patagonia. He was heading to Bolivia after the Galapagos, and I was heading to Cuenca on mainland Ecuador. I've decided to skip Bolivia because it requires an expensive visa fee for Americans and only lasting for 30 days. But perhaps I'll visit someday. On a day trip to Bartolomé Island, I realized I made the right choice of traveling the world in my 30s when I'm strong and healthy. There were 2 portions to the tour, a short uphill hike and then snorkeling. Half of our group were elderly British people. One woman who looked in her 70s didn't have the energy to climb the last flight of stairs to see the glorious viewpoint. I watched her sitting down below with her legs crossed and a stubborn frown on her face, while everyone else took in the spectacular horizon just a few meters above. She didn't want to change into her bathing suit to go snorkeling either, claiming it would take too long and was too much hassle. I was amazed. This woman traveled from England to the Galapagos Islands only to sit on the boat for 2 hours while the rest of the group swam with sharks, sea lions, and penguins. I was glad she was there, hopefully enjoying herself in her own way, but I was also glad I've chosen not to wait until retirement age, when my body may not be able to handle all the hiking, trekking, snorkeling, and scuba diving as planned. On a different tour, there was a woman in her 60s who snorkeled for the first time in her life. She saw eagle rays and hammerhead sharks. I wonder if she'll be disappointed when she snorkels from now on for the rest of her life. The Galapagos sets a high bar. I remember my first time diving. Every descent was a revelation. Every single starfish and sea anemone was magical. Now, after I see a turtle, I want to see a shark. After a shark, I want a manta ray. After a manta ray, I want a dolphin. After a dolphin, I want a whale. After a whale, I want 10 whales. I confess, it's difficult to feel grateful for the starfish now. Well, I got my wish the next day. I saw something strange and unexpected while snorkeling on Floriana Island. At first, I thought it was a manatee because of its pale color, but it had large black fins that spread around its body like a flower. I wondered to myself, what on earth was this animal? A jet of brown liquid shot out from under the black fins. It was my snorkel guide, having diarrhea in the water. He pulled his wetsuit down around his thighs to relieve himself while the rest of the group was getting back on the boat. He turned his head, and we locked eyes for half a second, and I swam away from the waist and let him finish his business. On the way back, we both acted like nothing happened. I was surprised, confused, and a bit annoyed to be on tours with people who didn't know how to swim. I wondered why they didn't learn before coming to the Galapagos, where the current is strong and rather intimidating. At the same time, I admired their courage to don a life jacket and jump into the open ocean, determined to experience the wonders of the Galapagos to the fullest of their capability. Perhaps it was bravery mixed with foolishness. I felt the strongest current at Kicker Rock off San Cristobal Island. Our dive master told us to stay close to the rock or the current would sweep us away. I cut my hand on the rock I was holding onto. It was the first time I felt a down current where we had to swim upwards just to stay where we were. We saw Galapagos sharks, sea turtles, an octopus, and a large shoal of fish. The current at Darwin and Wolf Island is even stronger, but the marine life is also more spectacular. Perhaps I'll go someday, when I have more money. These days I go to bed at 8 p.m., sometimes earlier. My alarm is usually set for 5:30 or 6 a.m., so I can have my overnight oats and use the bathroom before the car picks me up for the day's tour. Lunch is included, and I get back to the hotel in the afternoon, usually around 3 p.m. I do any work assignments in my inbox and have an early dinner at 5:30 p.m. There's a portrait of Charles Darwin in the lobby of every hotel I've stayed in. I think I'll give the origins of the species a try someday. Apparently the core ideas are still valid today, but have been refined or replaced by new discoveries. I found a moment of peace at the Charles Darwin Research Center on Santa Cruz Island. Since I was a child, bookstores and libraries have been my sanctuary. Reading was my first method of travel. When I lived in New York City, the first errand of my Saturday morning routine was a visit to the public library on East Broadway before doing the week's grocery shopping. Nowadays, I use an e-reader because of the undeniable convenience, but libraries and bookstores remain a source of comfort no matter where I am in the world. The library at the Charles Darwin Research Station was about the size of a backyard patio and heavily air-conditioned. Every single book was about wildlife or natural science. It was like stepping into a corner of the world that ignored everything else. An island within an island. I chose a book on dolphins and whales and sat down at a large table. There were 3 other people present, and they were very busy. 2 of them looked like employees, and the third looked like a scientist. Using my library whisper, I asked her what she was doing. She replied, she was researching marine iguanas. 5 sets of stapled paper documents covered her desk. Each looked at least 50 pages thick, and she was printing more. I marveled at her passion. To be dedicated to something so specific for years, possibly over a decade of her life, possibly even her entire life. My first career lasted only 4 years before I decided to change everything. I believe I'd want to pursue success in that field for my entire life. How differently things have turned out. After the library, I went for a walk on the beach near the research station. Marine iguanas were sunning themselves on the sand. Boats of various sizes bobbed on the ocean. A woman sat on the rocks having a video call. The waves crashed near enough to spray her with seawater, but she didn't seem to mind. A young man did push-ups on the sand. He smiled at me. I smiled back. He pointed to a hermit crab on the sand. I sat down on a fallen log to take a closer look. He took a seat next to me. His name was Eduardo. He was born in the Galapagos and worked as a pilot. He asked me if I had been to Tortuga Bay, and I said no. I went scuba diving earlier that day and didn't have time. He asked if I had seen the lava tunnels. I said I saw one on my first day. He said there were bigger, better ones that he could show me. He seemed very proud to be from the Galapagos. He asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said no. He asked if I'd like to go on a motorbike ride around the island. I said yes. It was almost sunset. His query about my relationship status hinted at certain intentions. I was aware of the risks, but I was also in the mood for spontaneous adventure. He took me through an industrial part of Santa Cruz, full of warehouses and concrete blocks. Then we drove into a rural village. It got darker. We passed 2 horses on the dirt path. One of them had an erection. I started getting cold. We drove further. The moon appeared. I started shivering. He pointed to a house and said he lived there. I was getting hungry. He slowed down the bike. It was completely dark now. I asked if he could take me back into town. He said, "Of course." He dropped me off near my hotel, and we said goodbye. With my urge for spontaneity fulfilled, I was now hungry. I wanted lobster, but I didn't want to pay so much for a meal. It's unbelievable how lobsters used to be served as prison food because of their abundance hundreds of years ago. I decided to order the menu of the day, complete with shrimps, rice, beans, and salad. Shrimp and lobster have a similar texture, flavor, and nutritional profile, yet one was $30 and the other was part of the $5 set menu. When I got back to the hotel, a girl was eating lobster in the shared kitchen. She bought it fresh from the docks for $12 and boiled it herself. I started making overnight oats for tomorrow's breakfast and listened to her sucking lobster meat out of the shell, impressed and a little jealous at the fruits of her resourcefulness. My last day in the Galapagos turned out to be more exciting than I anticipated. I naturally woke up before 6 a.m., so I decided to visit the Interpretation Center on San Cristobal Island, which has free admission and opens at 6 a.m. I spent 45 minutes learning about the history of the islands, and afterwards followed the walking path towards the beach. I was looking forward to some precious moments of silence after 12 days of non-stop tours where, even though you are exploring an uninhabited island, the presence of other people means the sound of constant conversation. Rarely was there a period of true tranquility, no matter how pristine the environment. I did not expect a sea lion blocking the path. It was a large male, sleeping. It had shuffled 50 meters uphill from the beach, so it must have been exhausted. There was a bit of space for me to step around, so I was able to gingerly make my way down to the beach without disturbing him. 20 minutes later, I walked back up the path, and the sea lion was awake, alert, and facing me. He covered the entire path with his body. I approached slowly, foolishly hoping he'd let me pass. I tiptoed closer until there was about a meter between us. He stood up on his front flippers, let out a roar, and charged. Luckily, sea lions don't move very fast on land. I turned and ran, and maybe let out a little scream. There was a second exit from the beach to the main road, and I made my way back to my hotel in one piece. On one of my snorkeling tours, there was a teenage girl traveling with her father. She asked me if I knew the difference between a seal and a sea lion. I replied, sea lions have external ear flaps, while seals just have a hole. Sea lions also have larger front flippers and walk easier on land, while seals have smaller flippers and move by wriggling on their bellies. She said, I seemed to know a lot about animals. I replied that I didn't really. Once I had the exact same question she did concerning seals and sea lions. I looked it up, and now I know. The girl nodded and looked thoughtful. Of the 3 islands I visited, my favorite was Isabella Island. It was the most peaceful. My mornings were accompanied by sea lions frolicking in the turquoise water, marine iguanas strolling on the white sand, and the occasional penguin taking a leisurely dip. Seeing a sea lion never failed to put a smile on my face. They seemed to say, "Don't worry, sweet lady, everything will be fine." It's shocking how small, quiet towns surrounded by nature are now my favorite places to be. I lived in big cities for most of my adult life. After growing up in the suburbs of Virginia, I dreamed of living in New York City. Once I got there, I thought I'd live there for the rest of my life. Now I live any and everywhere. I wonder where I'll finally put down roots. Only 3% of the Galapagos is inhabited. We'd stop on an empty island during a tour, and I asked the naturalist what lives on the rest of the island. He'd answer, "No one knows. We're not allowed to go past a certain point." Moving to the Galapagos is not possible for mainland Ecuadorians unless they marry a native Galapagos resident. You can get legal residency after 10 years of marriage. If you get divorced before those 10 years, you lose your resident status as well as any property acquired on the Galapagos during the time of your marriage, and you must move back to the mainland. A naturalist told me many locals who move to the mainland for work tend to return to the Galapagos because it's safer, with better salaries. One guide told me it was her dream to be a Galapagos naturalist since she was a little girl. It was highly competitive and required years of rigorous study, but she made it. Now that her dream came true, she doesn't know what to do with the rest of her life. I asked if she ever wanted to live in the big city or travel the world. She replied no. She loved her peaceful life, and her job involved daily changes of scenery, taking her to a different island almost every day. She lived and worked in a famous part of the world that foreigners from first world countries paid thousands of dollars to visit for 1 week. There were no skyscrapers or bustling streets. There are more sea lions than there are cars. Last week she saw orcas reaching on the horizon. She looked my age, and she was content. Like many people all over the world, I felt the pull of the big city as I approached young adulthood. I was drawn to arts and design at a young age and decided to pursue it in university. I was accepted into a well-known design school in New York City where I learned the skills of the trade. I landed a well-paid job at a large company and started my career right after graduating. 1 year later, I was promoted. Another year passed and I was promoted again. After my 3rd year, I felt lost and restless, not just with my job, but with my entire life. I traveled often, had a circle of friends, and enjoyed the life of a young professional in the big city, but I began to want something different. I don't want to call it something more, because I have plenty of friends who lead full and happy lives with the exact things I just mentioned. My creativity was stagnant, and I was frustrated with the parameters of my freedom of movement. While I was grateful for my job that gave me health insurance, a 401k, and paid vacation days, I wanted to explore outside the path I chose when I was a mere teenager. I was still an ambitious young woman with a drive for accomplishment, but I needed to explore different facets of these traits. I just finished reading Fences, a play by August Wilson. The story follows a former baseball player who faces challenges in his life as a garbage collector. He builds a literal and emotional fence around his family, leading to conflict and tension with his wife, sons, and himself. As he grapples with his past and present, he must confront the consequences of his choices. Sometimes I do wonder if I'm making the right decision, what the consequences of my choices will be when I'm an old woman, each day walking closer and closer to the end of life's journey. Will I look back and think to myself, that was quite a ride, and yes, it was worth it. You'll never know who you'll meet when traveling long-term. Get a glimpse of my daily life on a tiny tropical island in the Caribbean in this video, where I accidentally move in with a recovering drug addict.